Front Street way back in the day. It was called Front Street because it literally fronted the waterway. If you get online and look at some old photos, you'll see that literally this thing sat down on the mud flats, about 10 to 15 feet lower than we are right now. None of these buildings on my left existed. And here's the deal. 1889, June 6th, around 2:15 p.m., a young man named John Back was melting a big block of hoof glue. And they called it hoof glue, by the way, because it was made out of dead horses and little children that misbehaved. Okay? And if you want a longer version of what I'm about to tell you, finish up telling you, you want to take the underground tour. It's a very cool thing to do. You'll be underground, under the sidewalks, looking at the old storefronts that are still in existence. So John Back's melting his big block of hoof glue. His hoof glue bucket tips over. This guy's an apprentice carpenter, by the way, and he's in a workshop. It's filled with wood chips and turpentine and other flammable goodies. And he tips this bucket over. In essence, it's a grease spill. It ignites somehow. And what are you supposed to do when you have a grease fire, people? How are you going to put it out? Smother it. You're exactly right. But guess what they did?
Poured it straight on.
They did. They poured water on it. This spread this thing like gasoline, people. Across the street, there were a couple of really bad things going for Seattle that day. One was a liquor store that had big casks of liquor. Another was a warehouse that had casks of gunpowder. His little workshop catches fire, and the exact location is right there where the placard is on the corner of that wall right there, of that building. And it blows those two buildings up, basically shooting flying embers, or flying matches, if you will, into the sky. Those things are landing on multiple buildings simultaneously. And in 12 and a half hours, 35 square city blocks of Seattle were gone. That's how quick this place went. The volunteer fire department couldn't put it out. They realized when they hooked up the hoses, which amounted to maybe 3 total, before the pressure was down to nothing, that they were in big trouble. People ridiculed them, made fun of them. Finally, they walked away and watched the whole city just, boom, go up. 12 and a half hours, thinking about that. So everybody got pretty excited. They needed to get the economy up and running again. So here's what they did. Did a couple things different. By the way, nobody was killed during that monstrous fire. Not one person. It did kill millions of rats. Not any people. Let me touch on something a little bit sad here. Side note for Washington State, if you didn't know. Washington State is the only state in the union with a little children's federal penitentiary. If you didn't know that. There's their exercise yard right here on my right. They weren't out there. They must be in their little workshops making those little license plates that you guys bought. So when they rebuilt the city, they did a couple things different. They decided to get the city up off the mud flats. So they built a seawall, which we're now replacing, right? They elevated everything. They backfilled that, elevated everything, the whole city. They regraded and elevated it about 10 to 15 feet. These streets that we're driving on were about 10 feet above the originals. The new stores that they built down below on the old original stuff, on the mud flats, eventually using those as foundations on the new city that we see today. Okay, here's more Seattle, people. Seattle.